Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. A broad-ranging consultation has been held on South Africa's new growth path, which seeks to create 5 million jobs by 2020. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss some of the emerging themes. Terence, welcome to Second Take. There was much anxiety when the new growth path document was released last year. Have those anxiety levels died down at all?
Yes and no. I think the main reason why things are the temperature seems to be a little bit lower is that the focus is really on the microeconomic package within the new growth path. Things that people don't really have a lot of disagreement around. Things like skills development, deepening the education and training base in South Africa, improving the quality there, building the sort of green industries, and regional integration and local content. So there's not a lot of contestation for ideas in that space. People generally agree, whether they're in business, government or labour. So all the social partners at NEDLAC are discussing the new growth path and the implementation. And I think the Minister of Economic Development, which is Ebrahim Patel, he's tried to draw a line in the sand around the debate or the contestation for ideas, saying, it's not that we don't have a lot of good ideas in South Africa. The problem is the move from those good ideas to implementation of those good ideas, and he feels the focus should be on the implementation side of the new growth path now and getting at least some of those elements into an action phase. And he was supported this week by Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe, who said it's time to set ideology aside, set interests aside and focus on the big goal, which is the framework of creating 5 million new jobs by 2020.
What are some of the major themes emerging?
Well, I think under the microeconomic side, the two big things that I think are emerging for me are the infrastructure and the emphasis being placed on infrastructure and trying to leverage that to the maximum advantage for job creation and localization, and regional integration being the other key theme that I think is a sort of a coming together and a sort of implementation vision and implementation plan starting to emerge. Now, under the infrastructure program, we know we've got these very large, long life infrastructure build programs that we have to pursue. Eskom's got a massive build program in the energy space, and we're also going to have the private sector moving into that space to provide the capacity that Eskom's not going to be able to fund. And then we've also got Transnet and the transport space, and the feeling is there again, Transnet's balance sheet is really not sufficient. So there is a consultation underway to bring in the key client sectors, being the mines and some of the large industrial players, to look at leveraging their balance sheets to try and support the actual physical infrastructure building. But aligned to that, there's going to be a big push to beef up the local content within those programs. So we've seen the Industrial Policy Action Plan also emerging and putting a lot of store on that and the job creation potential and the industrialization around the infrastructure programs. And I think that generally business is quite excited about that. There are going to be winners and losers from that process, but the theme is to try and bring in the original equipment manufacturers, say that we've got a long life infrastructure rollout here. Let's be a partner of choice with you. Let's build these train sets or these local components for the power stations locally. And let's not just do it for South Africa, let's do it for the rest of the region, as well as potentially some of those components going into power programs or transport programs in the rest of the world. So that's a big theme. And then the other one that I think is a little bit at an earlier stage and a lot more difficult to achieve is on regional integration. I think South Africa's integration to the BRICS group is really about South Africa being a representative of Africa within that group. South Africa is just nowhere near the BRICS, the rest of the BRICS in terms of size and population. But once you start adding SADC, and now there's talk about a merger between SADC, COMESA and the East African community, we really have a regional integration that takes us from Cape to Cairo through that block, and actually those discussions are starting to happen later this month. We're then looking at 1 billion people. We're then looking at a fairly large economy. We then start punching our weight within the BRICS group. So there's a big emphasis now on really understanding regional integration, understanding serious constraints to regional integration that exists, and these are not just tariff barriers. In fact, a new study out of the World Bank shows that tariff barriers are not the problem with regional integration. There's a range of non-tariff barriers, and some of them are very, very ill-conceived, that is preventing a scaling up of inter-regional trade and investment. So I think that's another key theme. Obviously, there's a range of others in the new growth path, but I think those are two where I think there's some traction.
Now, what about the areas of contention? Will we be able to move ahead while those are still outstanding?
Well, at some point, as Minister Rob Davies said this week, we're going to have to deal with or grapple with the macroeconomic package within the new growth path. And that is really the area where there's a lot of ideological contestation, because that package within it, there's a few things, but the two areas of contention relate to the rand and its level, where the new growth path is saying we need a more competitive currency and we need a more stable currency. Now, when you hear the word competitive currency, that's a euphemism for a weak rand. And what we've really gone through is a period of significant rand strength, which is really a result of some of the actions that have been taken in other economies or in the large economies to get us out of the global financial crisis, the quantitative easing out of the US, the loose monetary policy out of Europe. And we are in a period where the rand has really strengthened quite significantly, and the export side of the economy and the value-added goods producers are really unhappy with the fact that they are no longer competitive on a range of fronts. So at some point, I think we are going to have to engage with this more aggressively. The problem is, we're also facing fuel and food inflation, and that's imported inflation in South Africa's context. And the rand has put something of a dampener on that inflation. And if the rand does overshoot, we could see inflation rising and surging, and that really is going to be negative for the country as well. So it's an issue of balances, and a number of proposals are being looked. We are having the Reserve Bank, buying more foreign currency reserves, and that's an expensive process. But it does, and it has shown in other countries that it can help stabilize the currency. But there's talks underway about other possible mechanisms, including maybe ring fencing revenues coming out of the commodity super cycle and putting that maybe into a sovereign wealth fund, which would be a dollar-based fund outside the country, and possibly even using that sovereign wealth fund so the money can't come back, otherwise you're going to have the rand strengthening again, in the region to support regional projects. And in that way, boost our exporters in South Africa, because they would supply inputs into those projects. But we had an very early stage of that discussion. But I think Rob Davies is right. At some point, we are going to have to re-engage. And then obviously the contentious issue around wage moderation, and this would be a tiered thing where executives would take the biggest pain and workers the least. And there was outcry when that was suggested in the new growth path. But again, I think we'll probably see that debate emerging again at some point.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.